point that I want to make is that what you were doing when you look at a case, that one could imagine, because Brown was the case on school desegregation. And the precedent of Brown could be applied in that way. Yet it seems to be wrong in another sense to think of Brown as just a school desegregation case, just as it would be wrong to think of Plessy and Ferguson as just a case that had something to do with railroad cars. The fact of the matter is that the Plessy case, separate but equal, was founded on the proposition that and they mentioned schools, and specifically in it, but that there was no problem of any inferiority implied by segregation of the races against one or the other of the equal. And it was that precedent which justified the Jim Crow laws, the formal segregation, state-enforced segregation that you had in the South. And it was that which was a great contribution of Brown in terms of overruling. Because it seems to me that until the Supreme Court of the United States were to overrule that proposition, it was absolutely impossible to get the Congress of the United States to do anything about that, and even you run out of executive power fairly quickly. If you're going to resolve a problem like race, it's going to take all three branches of government to do it. And I begin there because I was teaching here at the law school when Brown came down, and I remember Tom Emerson, who was certainly as liberal a professor as one could find, said, "My God, that's a great decision, but how in heaven's name do they expect to enforce it? It's the biggest administrative job that's ever been taken on." And I don't know to this day what the court thought was going to happen. They knew perfectly well that they had done something that was going to offend a great many people in the United States, because there was a huge amount of racial bias at that time, just as I think there's still a good deal of racial bias today. But at that time, it was there, it was throughout the country, it wasn't confined to the South. So it knew its decision was revolutionary. I don't think it knew what was going to happen, and I don't think probably anybody could have contemplated the really massive resistance that you had to that decision. Certainly General Eisenhower had not thought that he was going to be sending troops to Little Rock, Arkansas to get just a few children into school. Certainly when James Meredith was ordered by the Supreme Court, actually, by Justice Black, to attend the University of Mississippi, I didn't expect to start a riot and have 15,000 troops there the next morning, putting it down. It was a huge, huge revolution that was going on, and there was absolutely no attention in the South being paid to school desegregation or to any other form of segregation. Now what happened, which was essential to what progress we have made, was while the Legal Defense Fund was bringing case after case and school after school, where we were doing the same thing in the Justice Department. Dr. King had heard about the decision, and he saw us against segregation, and he took a very broad view of that. And he started sit-ins in restaurants, lunch counters, and so forth. And marches for equal treatment for a colorblind society, which is the way he associated it. I don't think necessarily incorrect with that decision. That caused, because of the huge amount of feeling in the South, that became a very, very dangerous situation. And when I joined the Justice Department and Bobby Kennedy in 1961, that was the situation that existed in the South. Where despite Dr. King's dedication to nonviolence, everything he was doing was causing violence by the other side because of the strong feelings that they had with respect to race. Again, if you stop to think of it, the problem is, what does the federal government do in those circumstances? There's no federal police force that you can use. Bobby thought maybe if we swore a lot of people in as marshals, and there's some loophole in the law where the marshal in his state goes back to the days of the frontier and swearing people as deputies, so we could swear in other law enforcement people as deputy marshals. But, you know, you're talking 200 or 300 people. We wanted to bring lawsuits, but lawsuits take time. We brought a lot of voting rights cases, we joined in and brought a lot of school cases. But the beat continued, the danger of violence was there, and it was perfectly clear that we could not deal with the problem that had been caused by the Brown decision, and that we could not deal with it in the courts. And we had no other way of dealing with it. We had to have legislation. Fortunately, the brutality of Sheriff Clark and others was such. Television was just coming into its own. That brutality was seen in every living room in the United States, and it was more than many, many people could take. It was, I think, an act of both leadership and courage on President Kennedy's part when he finally decided maybe broad civil rights legislation was possible. Maybe there was enough anxiety about the potential violence and actual violence going on in the South. Maybe there was enough disgust with the way in which Southerners were acting to justify this. And so he made that decision just at the time that George Wallace was posturing in the schoolhouse when he worked at the University of Alabama. And in a great speech, spoke of it as a moral problem. We didn't have the votes in the House, despite Democratic majorities in both houses. We didn't have the votes in the House on the Democratic side to enact legislation. We needed to have the Republicans. Unfortunately, a really fine Republican, Bill McCulloch, of Ohio, Bert Marshall went to visit him as we sent down the legislation. He was the senior member of the Republican on the Judiciary Committee, and spoke to him about supporting the bill. And McCulloch, who came from the old district that President McKinley had once represented, and I think there was not a black in the district, said he would support a fair civil rights bill, but he would support it only if it was fair, and if we agreed that we would not give away all of the goodies in it when we went to the Senate. He did not want the House to be made a whipping pool for the Senate. We agreed. We didn't really have much choice, but we agreed. And he kept his bargain. The Democrats immediately wanted to run away with it as a bill, to put in a lot of things that they knew they'd have to give up in the Senate. We remember our promise to McCulloch, and Bobby Kennedy went down and testified against a bunch of provisions in that act that he firmly believed in. Because McCulloch did not want us to tell people that he was free to do this. So we got that legislation through the House, fighting the civil rights groups every inch of the way. Because we had, if we were going to get legislation. President Kennedy was assassinated and went to the House, to the Senate. I remember about 2 days after the bill had gone through the House, Lyndon Johnson said to me, I saw him in the White House on occasion, he said to me, what are you going to give up in that bill to get it through the Senate? He said, nothing. You're going to get cloture. He said, I don't think you can get cloture. I said, well, if you don't think so, and you say so, we never will get it. And we went through these crucial votes, and we needed 67 votes, and there were 72 possibilities to raise proposals. And with the help of Lyndon Johnson, with the help of everybody else, we succeeded in getting those votes and getting a very strong civil rights bill through. But let me say just one thing in closing about that bill, which I think is extremely important to understand in terms of the attitude of the time. I like to think of that bill, and many others do, as the beginning of a genuinely colorblind society. But let me tell you, in all honesty, I think a majority of the people in the House and the Senate thought of that as something that was punishing the South, wasn't going to have any effect of significance in terms of their jurisdictions and their places. As I worked on that with Senator Dirksen, what impressed me, and to some extent, what to a great extent distressed me, was the fact that all Senator Dirksen could ask was, what effect is that going to have in Illinois? There was so much of that racial prejudice which existed then. I want to conclude by saying that yes, Brown has desegregated schools. School situation is probably worse now, in a way, than it was then in terms of segregation. I think we have solved a lot of problems, but we have not solved the school problem, and we will not solve the school problem until there is leadership at every level. The courts cannot resolve it. The executives cannot resolve it. Legislatures cannot resolve it. It can only be resolved if there's leadership at the executive level, support from the courts, and legislation that will implement it.